She almost didn't ask him. She stood at the edge of the hallway, holding a small white envelope in her hand, and she told herself 3 times to just walk away. Put the envelope back in her purse. Forget the whole thing. Find someone else, or better yet, go alone like she always did. But then he looked up, and something about the way he smiled at her, slow, gentle, like he had all the time in the world, made her feet stay exactly where they were. Margaret, he said. Just her name. Nothing else. But the way he said it made her feel like she hadn't heard her own name in years. She took a breath and walked over to his desk. I have a question, she said. And you can say no. I mean it. Please say no if you want to. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at her like she was the only person in the building. I'm listening, he said. She held out the envelope. My daughter's wedding is in 3 weeks, she said. And I need a date. Not a real date. Just someone to sit with me, so I don't have to explain to everyone why I'm there alone again. He took the envelope. He didn't open it. He just held it. Again, he asked softly. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that holds 100 things it doesn't want to say. It's a long story, she said. He nodded slowly. I have time. She didn't know what to do with that. Most people didn't say things like that. Most people were always rushing somewhere. But he just sat there, easy and still, like time was something he had plenty of. So, she said carefully, will you come? He was quiet for a moment. And then he said, yes. She nodded, thanked him, and walked back down the hallway. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on her, soft and steady, all the way to the elevator. She didn't know his last name. She didn't know where he lived, or what he did on weekends, or why a man like him was working a quiet reception job at a small law firm in the middle of town. She didn't know any of it. Not yet. Her name was Margaret Ellen Calloway. She was 54 years old. She had gray at her temples that she had stopped fighting 2 years ago, and laugh lines around her eyes that her daughter called beautiful and her ex-husband had once called premature. She had raised 2 children mostly on her own. She had built a quiet life in a town outside of Portland, Oregon. A small house with a garden she loved, a job she was good at, and a routine that kept her safe. Safe was the word she used for it. But she knew, in the honest part of herself, that safe and happy were not always the same thing. Her daughter Emma was getting married in 3 weeks to a good man named Daniel. The wedding was going to be held at a vineyard 40 minutes outside of the city, and it was going to be lovely, and everyone was going to be there, including Margaret's ex-husband Richard, who was bringing his girlfriend of 2 years, a woman named Shauna who was 38 and very pretty and very kind, which somehow made everything harder. Margaret had no one coming with her. Her son, Thomas, would be there, of course. He was 28 and lived nearby, and he would sit with her and hold her hand when it got hard and sneak her extra bread rolls from the buffet. Thomas was a good boy. He always had been. But it wasn't the same as having someone beside you. Someone who was there for you specifically. Someone who turned to you during the ceremony and watched your face instead of watching the bride. She had almost asked her friend Carol. But Carol was going through her own difficult stretch, and Margaret didn't want to make it about herself. She had almost asked her colleague Dean. But Dean talked too much, and she knew she'd spend the whole reception managing him. And then one afternoon, 3 weeks before the wedding, she had come out of a client meeting feeling wrung out and quiet, and she had walked past the reception desk, and the man sitting there, the new one, the one who had only been there about 6 weeks, had looked up and asked if she wanted him to order her a coffee. She had stopped. She had looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time. He was maybe 58 or 59, she guessed. Silver-haired, tall, even-seated, with deep-set eyes the color of old wood, and a stillness about him that felt unusual. Like he wasn't performing anything. Like he wasn't trying to be anything other than exactly what he was. She had said yes to the coffee. They had talked for 11 minutes while it brewed. And something about those 11 minutes had stayed with her all week. She didn't fully understand why. He hadn't said anything remarkable. But he had listened to her in a way that felt like a gift. Not waiting for his turn to speak. Actually listening. So she had written his name on the inside of that small envelope. Thomas had found the stationery in a drawer, and she had laughed at the coincidence of the same name. And she had walked down that hallway. And now it was done. She had asked a man she barely knew to be her date. His name, she knew from the little nameplate on his desk, was James. Just James. They had lunch 3 days later. It was his idea, which surprised her. He had knocked gently on her office door on a Tuesday afternoon and said very simply, "If I'm going to be your date, I should probably know more about your family than nothing." She had put down her pen. "That's very practical." "I'm a practical man," he said. And he smiled, that slow, unhurried smile. And she had found herself saying yes before she thought about it. They went to a small Italian place 2 blocks from the office. She ordered pasta. He ordered soup. They sat by the window. She told him about Emma first. How Emma had always been the organized one, the planner, the one who made lists and kept them. How Emma had met Daniel at a work conference 4 years ago and known within the first month that he was the one. How Emma had called Margaret on a Sunday morning, voice shaking, and said, "Mom, I think I found him." And Margaret had sat down on her kitchen floor and cried without knowing exactly why. "Why did you cry?" James asked. Margaret thought about it. "I think because I was happy for her. And I think because I was scared for her. And I think because I recognized something in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time." "What was that?" She looked out the window for a moment. "Certainty," she said. "That feeling of being certain about someone. I'd forgotten what that sounded like." James was quiet. He didn't fill the silence with anything empty. He just let her words sit there. After a moment, he said, "Tell me about Thomas." She brightened. She always brightened when she talked about Thomas. "Thomas is my steady one," she said. "If Emma is the planner, Thomas is the anchor. He's the kind of person who shows up. Every single time he shows up." "Sounds like someone raised him well," James said. She looked at him a little carefully. "I did my best." "I think your best was quite good," he said. It was such a simple thing to say. But it hit her somewhere tender, because no one had said anything like that to her in a very long time. Her ex-husband had not been unkind, exactly, but he had not been generous with words like that. He had not been the kind of man who noticed the things you did quietly, behind the scenes, in the long years of effort, that don't show up anywhere visible. "You're easy to talk to," she said, almost to herself. "I've been told that before," he said, "though usually by people who are about to tell me something they're not sure they should say." She laughed. "A real one. Is that a warning?" "Just an observation." They walked back to the office afterward, side by side in the autumn cool, leaves dropping slow from the maples that lined the street. She noticed that he walked at her pace, not his. He adjusted without making it a thing. Just moved with her, easy and natural. She noticed that. She filed it away somewhere quiet. The second lunch happened the following week. And then a third. She noticed that he asked questions and remembered the answers. He asked about Emma's wedding colors, dusty rose and sage green, she'd told him. And the following week he mentioned it in passing, naturally, like he'd been carrying that detail around. It startled her. Richard had never remembered things like that. She caught herself thinking it and immediately felt guilty for the comparison. It wasn't fair to Richard. Their marriage had been complicated and sad, but it hadn't been cruel. He had been a distracted man, not a bad one. Distracted by work, by his own ambitions, by a version of himself he had been chasing for 23 years of marriage without ever catching. She had spent a lot of those years hoping she would be enough to make him stop chasing. She hadn't been, and she had made her peace with that. Mostly. One afternoon, on a rainy Thursday, they were walking back from lunch, and he stopped at the window of a small bookshop. He looked at something on display, a book of photographs, black and white, of small-town America from the 1950s. "My father was from a town like that," he said. Not to her, exactly. More to the window. It was the first time he had mentioned anything about himself. In 3 lunches and several hallway conversations, he had somehow managed to be present and warm and engaging without offering a single real piece of himself. She had noticed, but she hadn't pushed. She had learned long ago that pushing people toward things they weren't ready to give was a kind of violence, even when it was done gently. But now he had offered something. Voluntarily. She waited. "Small town in Vermont," he said. "Population maybe 800. Everyone knew everything about everyone." He paused. "My father was the pharmacist. Very well known. Very respected." Another pause. He had a whole life that the town didn't know about. She looked at his profile. His jaw was set but not hard. Just held. "What kind of life?" she asked very quietly. He turned from the window and looked at her. Something passed across his face. Not sadness exactly, but the shadow of an old sadness, one that had been lived with long enough to not be sharp anymore. "A complicated one," he said. He didn't say more. and she didn't ask. But that evening, sitting in her kitchen with a cup of tea and the rain still falling outside, she thought about the way he had said it. Not with shame, not with bitterness, with something that sounded more like understanding. Like he had spent a long time learning to hold a hard thing without breaking under it. She thought about that for a long time. 1 week before the wedding, Emma came to visit. She arrived on a Friday evening with a garment bag over her arm and a box of pastries from Margaret's favorite bakery. And she sat at the kitchen table in her sweater and jeans, looking so young and so radiant that Margaret had to take a breath. "You look happy," Margaret said. "I am happy," Emma said. Then, studying her mother's face, "You look different." "Different how?" Emma tilted her head. "Lighter, maybe. Like something is less heavy." Margaret got up to put the kettle on. "I don't know what you mean." "Mom." Emma said it in that way of hers, gently firm, like a door being held open. "You asked someone to the wedding." "Yes. A co-worker. He works at the reception desk. He's very calm and easy to talk to." "What's his last name?" Margaret paused at the kettle. "I'm not actually sure yet." Emma was quiet for just a moment. Then she said very carefully, "Are you sure about this?" Margaret turned around. "Emma, I'm not worried, Mom. I just want to make sure you're okay. You haven't brought anyone to anything in 7 years. And I know you, and I know that even things that seem casual to other people are never really casual to you." Margaret sat back down. She looked at her daughter's face, that open, earnest face that had looked up at her from a hospital bed 29 years ago, wrinkled and red and blinking. And she felt the particular tenderness that had no name, the one that was just love, simple and huge. "I know what I'm doing," she said softly. "I'm not expecting anything. I just wanted someone to sit with me." Emma reached across the table and put her hand over her mother's. "I just want you to be happy," Emma said. "Not performing happy. Actually happy." Margaret turned her hand over and squeezed her daughter's fingers. "I'm working on it," she said. "I promise." After Emma left that night, Margaret sat for a long time in the quiet house. The kitchen light was warm. The rain had stopped. The garden outside the back window was dark and still. She thought about what Emma had said. Lighter. Was she lighter? She tried to examine it honestly. The way she had learned to examine things honestly after years of not doing so. After years of telling herself that fine was good enough. That quiet was the same as content. That a life without grief was a good life, even if it was also a life without joy. She thought about James. His stillness. His way of listening. The line about his father in Vermont, and the complicated life, and the way he had looked at that photograph in the bookshop window with eyes that had seen a lot and forgiven a lot. She didn't know who he was. Not really. But she thought, and this surprised her, that she wanted to. She found out his last name by accident. It was 4 days before the wedding. She had come into the office early, before most people arrived, and she was walking past the reception desk when she noticed he had left a book on the corner of it. A paperback, worn and well-loved. She glanced at the spine out of habit. Then she looked at the name written in black marker on the inside cover. The way people used to label their books before everything went digital. James Harrington. She stood very still. She knew that name. Not from the office. Not from the town. From somewhere older and further back, like a song you haven't heard in 30 years, but still know every word of. James Harrington. She said it in her mind 3 times, slowly, turning it over. And then the memory came. Not all at once, but in pieces, the way memories do when they've been buried long enough. A photograph in a newspaper. A story in the Portland Tribune, maybe 15 years ago. An architect, no, a developer, no, both. A man who had built something remarkable. A community project. A whole neighborhood rebuilt from nothing after a flood. She remembered the photograph because the man in it had looked so. She stopped. She picked up the book and looked at the inside cover again. James Harrington. She put it back exactly where she'd found it and walked to her office and sat down and did not pick up her pen for a very long time. She didn't say anything to him that day, or the next day. She thought about asking directly, just walking up to the desk and saying, "Are you the James Harrington?" But every time she got close to doing it, something stopped her. Something that felt almost protective. Not of herself. Of whatever this thing was between them. This small, fragile, unnamed thing that she didn't want to drop. Because she knew she had lived long enough to know that information changes things. That once you know something, you cannot unknow it. And right now, what she had was simple and good. A man who listened. A man who walked at her pace. A man who brought her coffee without being asked and remembered that Emma's wedding colors were dusty rose and sage. She didn't want to lose that in exchange for a biography. But she also couldn't pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. On Thursday, 2 days before the wedding, she stayed late at the office. She was doing paperwork, or trying to. The building was nearly empty. The lights had gone to their nighttime dim. She heard footsteps. He appeared in the doorway of her office with his jacket on and his bag over one shoulder. And he looked at her piles of paper and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and he said, "Are you avoiding going home, or is this genuinely necessary?" She laughed before she could stop herself. "Bit of both," she said. He came in and sat in the chair across from her desk. Not the one directly in front, but the one to the side, which she noticed because it felt less confrontational and more companionable. "You've been quiet this week," he said. "I've been busy." "Margaret." She looked up. He was watching her with those steady, dark eyes. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said. "But I'd rather you said nothing than pretended." She took her glasses off her head and set them on the desk. "I know who you are," she said. "James Harrington." The room was very quiet. He looked at her for a long moment, and then something in his face shifted. Not guilt, not alarm, but something more like exhaustion. The particular exhaustion of a person who has been carrying a name like a piece of heavy luggage for a very long time. "Ah," he said. "The Portland Tribune," she said. "Maybe 15 years ago. The Riverside Project." He nodded slowly. 14 years ago. Almost to the month. "You rebuilt an entire neighborhood," she said. 52 homes. 3 community buildings. A school. She paused. The article said it was the largest single private investment in affordable housing the state had seen in 20 years. He was quiet. "And then you disappeared," she said. The article mentioned that at the end, that the man behind it all had stepped back and asked for no further coverage. He looked at the window, at the dark glass and the city lights beyond it. "Yes," he said. "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back to her and said simply, "Because it wasn't done for attention." She looked at him. "Then why was it done?" He took a breath. And then, slowly, carefully, like a man opening a door he hasn't opened in a long time, he began to talk. His father had been, as he'd said, the pharmacist in a small Vermont town. Well known. Respected. But James's father had also been quietly, carefully wealthy in a way the town hadn't known about. Investments made in the 1960s that had grown without anyone paying much attention. A modest exterior over a very large interior. When his father died, James was 34, newly divorced, working in architecture in Portland. He had left James everything. Not just the house and the small pharmacy, but all of it. An amount of money that had startled James so deeply he had sat in a lawyer's office for a long time without speaking. "I didn't know what to do with it," he said. "I hadn't earned it. It wasn't mine in any meaningful sense. And my father," he stopped. "My father was a complicated man. I loved him, but he was complicated. And I think part of me felt like I needed to do something with that money that he couldn't do himself. Something that would matter to people who hadn't mattered to him." "The neighborhood," Margaret said. "The neighborhood," he said. It had flooded twice in 10 years. People kept rebuilding and flooding again. Nobody wanted to invest properly because the demographics weren't the right kind, if you understand what I mean. She understood exactly what he meant. "So I bought the land, hired the engineers, rebuilt the flood control system from scratch, built homes that were real homes, not just boxes. And I asked for nothing in return and no one's name on anything." He was quiet. "The Tribune found out anyway. That's always what happens. And after," he looked at his hands. "After, I needed to disappear for a while. The attention it was the wrong kind of thing. People treating you like a saint when you know you're just a person trying to get something right that went wrong. It felt dishonest. So I stepped back, went quiet, eventually found my way to smaller things. Like a reception desk in a law firm," she said. He smiled just faintly. "Like a reception desk in a law firm." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You could be doing anything. You have the money, you have the name. I have enough money to live simply and give the rest away," he said. "That's what I've been doing for 14 years. Quietly." He met her eyes. "I'm not telling you this to impress you, Margaret. I'm telling you because you asked, and because I don't want to be anything other than honest with you." She held his gaze. You've been honest with me from the beginning, she said. I think I just didn't realize how much. He nodded slowly. Outside, the city was quiet. The office hum had settled into something almost like peace. Still want me at the wedding, he said. And there was just the smallest note of something uncertain in it, something almost young, that moved her more than anything else he'd said. Yes, she said. More than before, actually. The day before the wedding, Emma called in the morning, and she was trying to be calm, but Margaret could hear the thread of nerves underneath. Everything is fine, Margaret said, before Emma could list her worries. The weather is going to be perfect. Daniel loves you completely. And your dress is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen on a human body. Emma exhaled. Okay. Thank you, Mom. After she hung up, Margaret stood in her kitchen and felt the morning around her. The light coming through the garden window, the coffee cooling in her cup, the particular stillness of a day before something important. Thomas came by in the afternoon to help her with a few things. Hanging a garment bag, finding her good shoes which had somehow ended up in the back of the hall closet. He was tall and broad-shouldered and capable, her Thomas, and watching him move around her house with easy confidence, she felt that particular pride that parents carry, deep and quiet, like groundwater. You seem good, Mom, he said, from somewhere inside the closet. Do I? You seem like you're looking forward to something. He emerged with her shoes. Is it the wedding or is it the guy? She took the shoes from him. The wedding, obviously. Thomas grinned. He had Richard's grin, wide and crooked and hard to argue with. I've never seen you look forward to a wedding before. You always spend the week before in a state of quiet, organized panic. That is absolutely not true. Mom, you alphabetized Emma's seating chart twice. I was being thorough. Thomas sat on the edge of the hall bench and looked at her. He had her eyes gray-green, watchful. Is he a good man? She thought about it honestly, the way she always thought about things when Thomas asked her directly. He deserved that. Yes, she said. I think he is. Then I'm glad, Thomas said simply. You deserve a good man. She looked at her son, her anchor, her steady one, 28 years old and still the boy who had climbed into her bed during thunderstorms. And she felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been held tight for a long time. You turned out remarkably well, she said. He stood and kissed her on the top of her head. I had a good teacher. After he left, she went into the garden. She sat on the old wooden bench and looked at the roses she had planted the year after the divorce. They were pruned back for autumn, but she could see next year in them. The shape of the new growth already forming, small and determined. She thought about what it meant to start again. Not to forget the past, not to pretend the hard years hadn't happened, but to let something new grow in the same ground. She had always believed that was possible in gardens. She had been slower to believe it in herself. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. Simple. Looking forward to tomorrow. Sleep well tonight. She read it twice. 3 times. She typed back, you too. Then she sat in the garden a little longer, in the cool autumn afternoon, and let herself feel something she had not let herself feel in a very long time. Hope. Just that. Quiet, small, real. Hope. She wore the deep blue dress. Emma had helped her pick it out 6 weeks ago, and at the time Margaret had thought it was perhaps too much, too rich a color, too much a statement. But Emma had stood behind her in the mirror and said, Mom, that's the one, in a voice that allowed no argument. She was glad now. Standing in her bedroom in the morning light, she looked at herself in the full-length mirror and tried to see herself honestly. 54. Gray at the temples. Laugh lines. A body that had carried 2 children and 4 decades of life and would carry many more years, God willing. She looked like herself. That felt like enough. She had arranged to meet James at the vineyard rather than have him pick her up, because she had needed to be there early for Emma, and she didn't want the logistics to be complicated. He had understood without a word of explanation. She was helping Emma into her dress, carefully, her hand steady even when her heart wasn't. When Emma looked at her in the mirror and said quietly, Thank you for everything you've done, Mom. Not just today. Everything. Margaret smoothed the fabric at Emma's shoulder. It was the best work I've ever done, she said. They both cried a little. They pretended they hadn't, fixed their makeup, and pretended again. The ceremony was held in the vineyard's open barn, which didn't sound beautiful but was golden wood and white flowers and rows of chairs and the soft autumn light coming through the wide doors. Margaret sat in the front row with Thomas on her left side, Thomas's girlfriend Lily on his other side. The seat to Margaret's right was empty until 5 minutes before the ceremony, when James appeared at the end of the row, tall and silver-haired in a dark gray suit, and made his way quietly to the seat beside her. He sat down. He looked at her. He smiled, that particular smile. "You look beautiful," he said, quietly, directly, with no ceremony to it, just a simple statement of a simple truth. She felt color come into her face, which she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said. "You look very well yourself." Thomas leaned forward from her other side and extended a hand. "Thomas," he said. James shook it. "James, I've heard a lot about you." Thomas looked at his mother with something approving in his eyes and sat back. And then the music began. When Emma appeared at the end of the aisle, on the arm of her uncle, her father's older brother, because Richard and Emma had agreed together and quietly that this was the right arrangement, Margaret had to press her lips together to hold herself steady. Emma was radiant. There was no other word. She was simply radiant. This person Margaret had grown from nothing, this girl who had become this woman, walking forward toward the person she was certain about. Margaret felt a hand close gently over hers. She looked down. James's hand, resting over hers on her knee. Not gripping. Just there. Steady and warm. She didn't pull away. She turned back to watch her daughter walk toward her future, and she held on. After the ceremony, after the photographs, after the tears that everyone cried and pretended not to, the reception moved to the vineyard's long terrace. Tables with candles, music low and warm, the smell of good food, and the last of the autumn roses climbing the fence. Margaret found herself at a table with James, Thomas, Lily, and 2 of Emma's friends from college who were funny and easy and kept refilling everyone's wine. She noticed that James was good in a group. Not loud, not dominating, but present. He listened to the stories the college friends told about Emma. He laughed at the right moments. He asked Thomas a question about his work. Thomas was a civil engineer, and became genuinely absorbed in the answer, which made Thomas glow in a way that made Margaret's chest ache with something close to gratitude. She noticed that Thomas noticed it too. After dinner, when the dancing began and the younger crowd moved to the floor, Thomas appeared at her shoulder. "Dance with her," he said to James without preamble. James looked at him, then at Margaret. "I'd like that," he said. "If you would." She would. She did. The song was slow, something old and familiar that she couldn't quite name, but felt like she had known her whole life. They moved carefully at first, the small awkwardness of 2 people finding a rhythm. And then something settled, and they were simply there, moving together in the warm terrace light. "This was a good day," he said. "It was," she agreed. "Your family is wonderful." "They are." She paused. "Emma is going to be very happy." "She already is," he said. "You can see it." They were quiet for a moment, swaying. "James," she said. "Yes. What happened to your marriage?" She felt him take a small breath. Not a defensive breath. More like the breath before something honest. "We were very young," he said. "We wanted different things, and neither of us knew how to say so without it becoming a wound. By the time we understood what had happened, too much had been lost." A pause. "She remarried. She's happy. We were kind to each other at the end. I'm grateful for that. No children. No." A quiet word. Something in it that was old and accepted. "We tried. It wasn't meant to be." He paused. "I've made my peace with it. Though I'll tell you, watching Emma and Daniel today, watching Thomas with Lily, I understand what I missed in a way I couldn't have 20 years ago." She pulled back slightly to look at his face. It was honest and open, that face. There was no performance in it. "You're not bitter about it," she said. "No." "How?" He thought about it. "I think because bitterness takes a kind of energy I decided I didn't have to spare," he said. "There were hard years. But hard isn't the same as wasted." She held that. "Hard isn't the same as wasted," she repeated quietly. "No," he said. "Not at all." The song ended. Another began, slightly faster. They stepped apart, and she laughed softly at the timing, and he smiled. Richard appeared at the edge of her vision. She had known she would have to speak to him at some point. She had prepared for it. She had spent 20 minutes on it in her kitchen the previous week, working out what to say and what face to wear. But now he was here and he was walking toward her, and Shauna was beside him, pretty and kind, and Margaret took a breath. "Margaret," Richard said, "you look wonderful." Thank you, Richard, she said. So do you. She meant it. He did. He had aged well, a little heavier, a little softer, which suited him more than the hard-driving version of himself she had been married to. Shauna, she said warmly, because this was a wedding and Shauna had never done anything to her. You must be so proud, Shauna said. Emma was just breathtaking. She really was, Margaret agreed. Richard looked at James. Just for a moment, a quick, evaluating look that men give without realizing they're giving it. Richard Calloway, he said. James Harrington, James said. He shook Richard's hand with complete ease, no edge, no performance. There was a brief, human moment where everyone stood in the territory of old history, trying to find their footing. And then Shauna said something kind about the terrace lights, and Margaret agreed, and Richard smiled, and it passed. After they walked away, James touched her elbow lightly. You all right? He asked. Yes, she said. And she was. She genuinely was. Thank you for asking. The night wound down the way good nights do. Slowly, reluctantly, people unwilling to let it end. Emma found her mother on the terrace steps as the evening was thinning, and she sat beside her, shoes off, hair slightly loose. She had the look of a woman who was completely, entirely happy. Good day, Margaret asked. The best day, Emma said. She leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. The best day of my life so far. Margaret put her arm around her daughter. There will be more best days, she said. I know, Emma said softly. That's what I love about everything right now, knowing there are more. They sat like that for a while, watching the remaining guests mill in the warm light, watching Daniel talking to Thomas with his arm easy around his new wife's absence, waiting for her to come back. I like him, Emma said suddenly. Daniel. Emma laughed. Obviously Daniel. I mean James. Margaret was quiet. He looks at you like you're worth looking at, Emma said. Simply. Plainly. He pays attention. I watched him all through dinner, and he watched you the whole time. Not in a, she searched for the word. Not in a possessive way. In a noticing way. Like he wants to know what you're thinking. Margaret didn't answer. Mom. I know, Margaret said softly. Do you like him? She thought about all the honest things she could say. The careful, safe things. The practical things. And then she thought about Emma walking down the aisle toward the person she was certain about. And she thought about what it felt like to be held on a dance floor by someone who had no performance in him. Yes, she said. I do. Emma squeezed her hand once, hard, and said nothing else. That, Margaret thought, was exactly the right response. James drove her home. She had arranged again to take her own car, but it was late and Thomas was leaving with Lily, and she had perhaps had a little more wine than planned. And James appeared beside her at the valet with the calm of a man who had already thought of the solution before the problem was fully stated. Let me drive you, he said. Thomas can arrange for your car tomorrow. She didn't argue. The drive was quiet and comfortable. The best kind of quiet, the kind between people who don't need to fill the air. The city lights moved past the windows. The radio played low. He pulled up outside her house. She looked at it. The small house, the dark garden, the porch light she always left on. And she felt the full weight of the day settle over her. The beautiful weight of it. Thank you, she said. For today. For all of it. It was my honor, he said. And he meant it. She looked at him in the dim car. His profile. The silver at his temples. The quietness of him. I don't want to pretend this was just a favor anymore, she said. Carefully. Honestly. He looked at her. I know, he said. Neither do I. The air between them was still and full. I'd like to have dinner with you, she said. Not as colleagues and not as anything pretend. Just dinner. Yes, he said. Without hesitation. Without calculation. Just yes. She nodded. She gathered her things. She put her hand on the door. James, she said. Yes. I'm glad I asked you. A pause. I almost didn't. He looked at her and his face held something quiet and sure. I'm glad you did, he said. I very nearly transferred to another department. She stared at him. You what? He smiled, that slow, unhurried smile. I had been told there was an opening in the accounts department. I had applied for it. They hadn't gotten back to me. If they had, then you would never have found me at that desk, he said. And you would have gone to your daughter's wedding alone and been perfectly fine. She thought about it. The edge of it. How close things could come to not happening. I wouldn't have been perfectly fine, she said quietly. No, he said. I don't think I would have been either. She got out of the car. She walked to her porch. She unlocked her door and turned around, and he was still there, watching her to make sure she was safely inside. She raised her hand. He raised his. She went in. She stood in her hallway with her back against the door and the whole day around her. Emma's face and the ceremony and the dancing and all of it, and she felt it settle. She felt herself settle. Winter came, the way it always does in Oregon, gray and gentle and quiet, the trees going bare and the mornings cool and short. She and James had dinner that first time at a small French place she had always wanted to try and never had, because it had always seemed like the kind of restaurant you went to with someone. And she had not had someone. She had someone now. Not formally. Not with a label. Just someone. Someone who called on Tuesday evenings to talk about nothing and everything. Someone who left a book on her desk once a week, chosen specifically for her. Never with a note, just the book, placed where she would find it. Someone who walked with her on Sunday mornings through the neighborhood, matching her pace without comment, pointing out things she had missed. The carved detail on an old building, the way the winter light hit the river, the small things that a person in a hurry would never see. She learned him slowly in pieces. His father's complicated nature, the private wealth, and beneath that a private coldness that James had spent many years unlearning in himself. His marriage at 29, brief and tender and ultimately incompatible. His years of building and then stepping back. His quiet current life, the donations made without names, the small good things done steadily and without audience. He was not a man without wounds. He was a man who had learned to live honestly with his wounds. She found that she trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone in a very long time. And trust, she had come to believe, was the deepest form of love. Not the first form. The first form was easy, passionate, blind. But this form, this deliberate, clear-eyed, chosen trust, this was the kind that lasted. In December, Thomas had them both over for dinner. It was an ordinary Thursday. Thomas made pasta, from scratch, which he had learned from YouTube, and which he was very proud of. And Lily made a salad, and they sat at Thomas's small table and talked for 3 hours. At one point, Margaret looked up and found Thomas watching her and James with an expression on his face that she recognized. It was the expression he had worn as a small boy when he decided something was right. A settled, satisfied look, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. She looked away before he could catch her eye, but she was smiling. On the way home, she and James walked part of the way through the neighborhood, even though it was cold. She had her coat and her scarf, and he had his hands deep in his pockets, and their breath came out in small clouds. "Your son is remarkable," James said. "He is. He has your way of paying attention," James said. "He looks at people the way you do. Like they matter." She thought about that. "He got that from somewhere better than me," she said. "He's always been that way. Even as a little boy. You're too hard on yourself. You don't know that." "Actually," he said, "I do." She looked at him. He was looking ahead, but she could see the side of his face and the easy certainty there. "You see it in how your children are," he said. "Children who are raised without love don't carry it that naturally. Emma and Thomas carry it like it's second nature. That comes from somewhere." He glanced at her. "It comes from someone." She didn't answer. She couldn't quite. But she reached out and took his arm, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow, and they walked the rest of the way home like that, quietly together in the cold winter dark. Emma called 2 weeks before Christmas. "Daniel and I want to host this year," she said. "Everyone together. You, Thomas, Lily, Aunt Patricia, and James, if he'd like to come." Margaret was at her kitchen window, looking at the garden. "Are you sure?" "Mom, he comes to Thomas's dinners. He's practically—" Emma paused, choosing her word. "He's part of things. Isn't he?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I think so," she said. "Yes. Then he should be there." She asked James that Sunday on their walk. Simple and direct, which had become her way with him, because with him she found she didn't need to perform or soften or calculate. "Emma wants you to come to Christmas," she said. He kept walking. He looked at the river for a moment. Then he said, "I'd like that very much. It might be," she thought about how to say it. "It might be a bigger deal than either of us intends for it to be." He looked at her. "Margaret, I know what it means." She held his gaze. "Do you want it to mean that?" she asked. Quiet. Honest. He stopped walking. She stopped too. He turned to her fully, there on the riverbank path with the winter gray above them, and the cold water moving beside them. "I have been careful with things I didn't need to be careful with," he said. "For most of my adult life. Careful with money I didn't earn. Careful with my name. Careful about being seen." A pause. "I don't want to be careful with this." She looked at him. "This matters to me," he said. "You matter to me. And I would very much like to come to Christmas." The river moved beside them. The cold air sat between them, and then it didn't. She stepped forward and took both of his hands in hers, and he held on. Not gripping, just holding, warm and real. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Christmas was exactly what it should have been. Emma's apartment was warm and slightly too full and smelled of pine and cooking, and someone's candle that was probably too strongly scented, but that everyone pretended not to notice. Thomas and Lily brought wine. Patricia, Margaret's sister-in-law, brought a fruitcake that no one touched but that everyone praised. James brought flowers for Emma and a bottle of very good whiskey for Thomas and a book for Margaret. This time with a note, the first time he had ever left a note with one of his books. She read it later, in the kitchen, when the noise of the room had moved into the living space. "For M, who reminded me that quiet and empty are not the same thing." She stood very still, holding the small card. She heard Emma behind her. "What does it say?" Emma asked. She handed her the card. Emma read it. She handed it back. She pressed her lips together for a moment in the way she had done since childhood when she was feeling too much to speak. "Keep him, Mom," she said in a half-whisper. Margaret folded the card and put it carefully in her pocket. "I intend to," she said. By spring, things had grown the way things grow when they are tended carefully and not rushed. They were not young people. They did not move at a young person's pace. They moved at the pace that was right for them, deliberate and real, each step chosen rather than stumbled into. And there was something beautiful in that, she thought. Something that haste would have destroyed. She had moved some of his books to her shelves. He had a drawer in her dresser. They had argued gently twice. Once about something inconsequential, and once about something that mattered. And both times they had navigated through it the way people who respect each other do. With patience and honesty, and the fundamental decision that the relationship was worth more than being right. She had introduced him formally to a few of her old friends. Carol, who was doing better, had liked him immediately. "He doesn't perform," Carol had said afterward. "You know how most men perform when they're trying to impress? He just is." Margaret had nodded. That was exactly it. He just was. In April, they planted the garden together. She had always done it alone. Always thought of it as her thing, her solitary ritual of hope. But that spring she found herself saying on a Saturday morning, "I'm going to put the roses in today. Do you want to help?" And he had put down his coffee and said, "Show me what to do." They worked side by side for 3 hours. She showed him how to prepare the ground, how deep to go, how to check the roots. He was careful with his hands, careful and precise, an architect's hands, she thought, trained to build things that lasted. At one point he was crouched over a rose that wasn't going in right, and she came over and knelt beside him and put her hands over his to show him the angle. And they were very close, the spring sun warm on their backs, the smell of earth around them. He turned his head slightly and looked at her. "Like this," he said. "Like that," she said. He smiled, and she smiled. And something about that small, quiet moment, kneeling in the garden, hands in the earth, the morning wide and warm around them, felt like an arrival. Not a destination, not an ending, but an arrival. The feeling of having walked a long way and finally being exactly where you were supposed to be. She thought about all the roads that had not led here. The years of a marriage that had slowly, painfully run out. The long stretch after, when she had kept herself safe and small and convinced herself it was enough. The 100 small moments of loneliness she had tucked away without examining. She thought about the white envelope, the hallway, the almost. She thought about how close she had come to not asking him. She pressed the earth gently around the rose. "James," she said. "Yes. I'm glad the accounts department took so long to call you back." He laughed, a real full laugh, warm as the spring morning. "So am I," he said. "Margaret, so am I." Later, much later, in the way that later comes, Emma would tell the story at a dinner table, the way families tell stories that become part of the legend of themselves. She would say, "The first time I really knew, not suspected, not hoped, but knew, was at my wedding. I was walking down the aisle," she would say, "and I was looking at Daniel, the way you're supposed to look at the person you're walking toward. But for just 1 second, one fraction of a second, I looked to the side. And I saw my mother. And my mother was looking at him. Not the way you look at a man you've just met. Not the way you look at a stranger you're being polite to. She was looking at him the way I was looking at Daniel. That certain way. That look that says, "This is the person I want to be beside." And he was holding her hand. Just like that. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I thought, oh, there it is. There she is. There's my mother coming back. Thomas would tell his version differently. He would say, "It was the garden. I came over one afternoon in April," he would say, unannounced, the way kids do with their parents when they know they're always welcome. "And I came around the side of the house, and there they were in the garden. My mother and James. And they were planting something. And they weren't talking. They were just working. Together. Quietly. Like they'd been doing it their whole lives. And Mom looked up and saw me and smiled. But it was a different smile than I'd seen on her in years. It wasn't the smile she used to wear that was careful and small and making sure everyone was okay. It was just a smile. Simple and full. Like she wasn't managing anything. Like she was just happy. He would pause here every time he told it. And that was when I knew he would say that she was going to be all right. There is no dramatic ending to this story. There is no grand gesture, no sudden revelation, no moment where the music swells and everything is resolved in a single perfect second. Real love doesn't work like that. Real love works the way gardens do. Slowly, quietly, through the kind of daily attention that most people don't notice and historians never write about. Through the accumulation of small true things. Coffee ordered without asking. Books chosen with care. Hands held during ceremonies. Doors stood beside until someone is safely in. Margaret Calloway was 54 years old when she stood in a hallway holding a white envelope and almost walked away. She is older now and wiser, and still not sure she deserves as much happiness as she has. But she is learning, slowly, the way she learns everything, to accept it, to let it be real, to stop waiting for it to be taken away. James Harrington spent many years trying to do good things quietly, without witness, without credit, without warmth coming back to him in return. Not because he was a saint, because he didn't know how to accept warmth. Because warmth had been in short supply in his quiet Vermont childhood, and he had grown into a man who gave it freely and struggled to receive it. He is learning too. They learn together, which is the best way to learn. On a Saturday morning in late spring, they sat in the garden with coffee. The roses were blooming, the ones they had planted together side by side, hands in the earth. The light was soft and early, and the birds were very busy. He was reading. She was thinking. After a while, without looking up from his book, he said, "What are you thinking about?" She looked at the garden. "Time," she said. "What about it?" She thought carefully. "I used to think about all the time I'd lost," she said. "The years that felt like waiting. The years that felt empty." She paused. "I don't think about it that way anymore." He put his book down. "How do you think about it now?" he asked. She looked at him. At this man she had almost not asked. At the gray in his hair and the steadiness in his eyes and the particular way he had, still, of making her feel like she was the only person in the room. "I think it was all leading here," she said. "I don't know if that's true, but it feels true. The hard years and the empty years and all of it. They're why I know how to be here now with you." She took a breath. They were the cost of getting this right. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand. The same way he had taken it at the wedding, quietly, without ceremony, just there, and he held it. "Yes," he said softly. Outside the gate, the morning was moving. People were walking dogs. Children were riding bikes. The ordinary world was doing all its ordinary things. But in the garden, everything was still. Time, for once, felt like something that was on their side. She had almost not asked him. He had almost been in a different department. Emma had almost walked down the aisle without seeing what she saw. Thomas had almost not come over that afternoon. The roses had almost not been planted. Almost. But almost is not the same as didn't. And didn't is not the end of anything. It is always, always still the beginning. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone or something you're still hoping for, or a love you're grateful for, please share it with someone tonight. And if you're still waiting for your almost to become something real, keep waiting. Some things take time. The best things always do. Thank you for staying until the end. We'll see you in the next story. The end.